You're listening to Siris Says podcast. Join us as we transcend cultural barriers and elevate diverse voices. Here, we inspire, inform, and empower one story at a time. Let's dive in. Welcome to Siris Says. On another episode today, I have a very talented guest. He does many things. His name is Lloyd Hall. Hi, Lloyd. How are
Hi,
you
thanks for having
doing?
me. I'm great.
So, you're so talented. I saw the repertoire of all the things you've done in your life, and you're such an intriguing person.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. But right now, what are you focused most?
I'd say the thing I'm focused most on is writing and bookbinding. That's been my kind of creative passion for the past couple of years now.
You knew as a kid this is something you wanted to do?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, when I was young, I was always writing stories, but I think I was always doing a little bit of everything. So that's kind of continued through my creative journey over the years. I was always designing games and writing stuff and doing illustrations, and I still have all my old pieces that I wrote back when I was in like second grade. It's always fun to go back and read those, but I've definitely come a long way since then.
That's awesome. So, what would you say people should know about you?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I like to be known as someone who just enjoys what he does. You know, every creative area I get into, I really just try to give it my all, whether that's hat making or bookbinding or writing. I really try to go all in and just kind of devote myself to it. You know, I'll do one creative field for a couple of years and then switch to something else, but always when I'm working on something, really just fully committing to it each time.
Giving the audience a little bit of background, you started as a designer. Was that something you did for long term, for a little while?
Yeah, I mean, I actually originally went to school for video game design.
Oh, wow.
So I did, back when I was in high school, I started teaching myself game design. So I learned a bit about like coding and how you build games from scratch. And so when I was looking to go to college, that was kind of the first area that I explored. So I went to school specifically for game design. And then I kind of felt like it was a step backwards because I'd done it for 4 years in high school. And then going to college, I didn't feel like I was getting quite as much out of it. So I actually switched into fashion design because it was a field I didn't know quite as much about. I knew a little bit about sewing, but it was a new field for me. And I thought it was, I don't know, more beneficial to be paying that much for college and really learning something new and getting something that I didn't already know.
And challenging to some extent, right?
Yeah, really pushing me to explore an area that I hadn't explored before.
That's awesome. And now that you started the books, when did you start the books?
So I'd started the books, I'd say actually probably a little bit before the pandemic started. I joined a writing group back on the East Coast where I was living, and I started doing early drafts of it. You know, the first book that I wrote actually began as a screenplay because I thought I'm actually going to make this as a short film, which did not end up happening, but it was still a fun experiment. And then when the pandemic happened, I ended up kind of just stuck at home for a while, as I think most people did. And I decided I would use that time to get the first draft of my book out. So I sat down. It actually ended up becoming the first two books. So I kind of wrote it as two parallel stories that I was telling. And then I decided that I would split them apart and make them each their own book. So I had a very productive pandemic in that way.
I would say, I mean, two, that means you were so inspired.
You know, even from the beginning, I kind of knew what I wanted the series to be. So I knew I wanted to do 4 books.
Wow.
And so even before the first one came out, I had already plotted out all 4 books. I knew kind of the arc of where it was going. And, you know, I'm just getting ready for book 3 right now, which is very exciting. And the draft of book 4 is already written. So, but I think it kind of comes back to that idea of really kind of keeping my focus on one thing at a time. So I'm not going to touch book 4 until book 3 is done and out in the world. And that way I'm not kind of distracting myself because I think, you know, especially, you know, doing creative stuff and working in creative fields, it's really easy to get distracted by new shiny creative
shiny
pursuits.
thing,
You know, every day I'm like, well, maybe I should take up, you know, blacksmithing or glass blowing. And it's hard not to fall down those other rabbit holes.
I see. And also burn out to some extent because once you start trying way too much, you start to be like, oh.
Yeah, and I think even with the writing, really trying to keep myself at a good pace with it, where I'm not trying to rush through and finish it all super quickly. Like each book, you know, I take about a year plus to write it, maybe even longer to edit the book, and not trying to churn them out as quick as I can. I'm just taking my time with it. Even when I'm writing, I try to write every day, but not a lot of words every day. Just that consistency, I think, really helps make sure that I'm still producing stuff, but also not getting burned out.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mind sharing with the audience, for those people, that's their dream, they want to write a book, right?
Yeah.
And so there's obviously a lot of steps involved.
Yeah.
So what would be the easy 4 steps, of what they should think, step 1, step 2, 3, and 4? If there's more, feel free to share.
Yeah, I would say first and foremost is find yourself a writing community. I think the having people to go through it with is so helpful, whether that's online or in person. I get my weekly newsletters from all my local libraries, because even when I move, I still stay subscribed to those. They send out emails that are basically hey, we do writing workshops and we do a writers group. So if people are looking for that community, I think there's a lot of really great opportunities to connect with people. But I think there's so many ways that you can go about pursuing writing as a passion. And I think, some people go the traditional publishing route, some people go the self-publishing route, which is what I'm doing.
Yes.
And, with self-publishing, there's a lot you have to learn. And so, talking to other people who've gone through it, who've experienced that, and have advice they can give is really helpful in your own journey. I know for my books, the first book that I published, there are definitely things that now, knowing what I know, I would go back and do very differently.
What would be those things?
Well, so
Mention a few.
yeah, so I think, when it comes to marketing your book, if you're self-publishing, you're doing it all yourself. And so you don't have a publisher or a literary agent that's kind of behind you to help reach out to people and get that publicity. And I didn't realize just how long the time frame is for some of those things. So, I reach out to a lot of book bloggers and people who write about self-published books, and I didn't realize that a lot of the time their turnaround time for reading and reviewing a book is 6 to 8 months. And so when I was doing my first book, I thought to myself, well, I'll give it about 2 months to promote the book and let people read it. It was definitely not enough time. And, I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that they just have these tall stacks of books they need to get through.
Right. That makes sense.
And yeah, so I think that was definitely one thing that I learned doing that. And then, even with the second book, not really planning out how I was going to market it and get it out into the world. Yeah, my advice to people looking to write their own books or get published is really just be consistent with it. And I think this is a piece that is always a little bit of tough love, but I think if you really want to write a book, you have to write it. You have to sit down and really start doing it. And I know a lot of people that always kind of talk about their stories, and they have ideas, and they have really great ideas sometimes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But at the end of the day, you do have to kind of set aside time each day to actually sit down and start getting words on the page. And I think it's tough because those words are not going to be great at first. You just need to get something out there. And then, as I said before, I spend almost a year going back and editing and polishing the book. And that's where it really starts to shine, I think. And that first draft is...
doesn't have to be perfect.
It never is. It is rough when I start.
Right.
And, I think it's also tough a little bit going to write another book, because the things that I'm comparing it against are the books that I've polished and I've spent all this time making a lot better. And so I'm comparing a first draft to something that is a lot further along. And that's a really tough hurdle to get over mentally.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think consistency, for sure. Even me doing my podcast, sometimes it's a pain, because it's not this glamorous and beauty. There's the sacrifice. You have to set time and you have to go, and sometimes you want to do other things, but then it's I love this and I want to put in the time, and effort into it.
Yeah.
To be successful to some extent.
I think one nice thing about writing, though, is once you've written the book, you don't have to write it each time.
That is the beauty of it. No, for sure, I'm jealous. Super jealous about that.
Well, but it's something that I've kind of discovered over my own creative journey, is doing fashion for years. And I loved it, but I had my own little fashion line for a while, and I was trying to sell garments that I was making.
Right.
But each one that I sold, I had to sew myself. I had to sit down and make it every single time. Whereas the book, I have a printer who prints all the copies.
Right.
I can write the story once and then share it with people. And it's not something I have to actively do every single time. It was the same with costume design or hat making or any of the other creative fields. Every single hat that I made. It wasn't just I design it once and then it exists.
Yeah.
I have to make each one of them.
That's true, and it withstands the time,
Yeah.
which is beautiful because it's something you write, it's out there, and it's,
And I know it's nice to have them on the shelf and be able to look at them. At the end of the day, I wrote the books to be something that I really wanted to read. And so even if I don't find
like you enjoy it yourself,
yeah, and so
right?
even if they never find a big audience or get popular, at the end of the day, there's still something that I would enjoy reading. And so I can always pick it up and have fun reading it.
Well, I think you're going to be very surprised because I think it's very interesting. I read a little bit of the summary of each book.
Oh, wonderful.
I have questions about Mercury. We'll
Yeah.
talk about it later because I'm in astrology. I'm an astrology person. So
Yeah.
do you, there's something to do with that. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Is there any other things that you can advise?
One thing that I found very helpful was taking classes, and really my degree is in fashion design, so it's definitely a very different field than writing. And so I think especially a lot of the classes help fill in some of the gaps that I have when it comes to writing. And I also think, I hired an editor for all my books. And so working with an editor, I've learned and grown just through the process of writing the books themselves. And, the book I'm doing right now, and I'm sure the one I do next, compared to the first one I did, there's a difference in the writing quality because I have been learning by doing it. That's another thing that people kind of need to keep in mind is the first book that you write is not always going to be like your literary masterpiece.
Right.
It's sometimes you just need to kind of get the writing out there.
It'll get better and better with time and
Yeah,
practice.
and you learn through doing practice, and whether that's through writing short stories first or writing poetry, exploring other fields of writing. But I signed up for a lot of classes that really helped me learn about how to write story structure, how to outline my characters, how to build essentially every part of the story. There are some that are paid classes, but there's also a lot of really great free resources out there.
You put in a lot of work.
I do, yeah.
I mean, like, this is not like, oh, I just decided to write and I just started. Like, you really put a lot of thought into it. You were kind of methodical about it. You did your research. Like you said, you got the community.
Yeah, and even when I was first starting out and I had the idea of, like, I want to write a book, it started with, brainstorming and really analyzing my story ideas and kind of getting to the meat of, like, does this have enough to make it a story that people would want to read?
Yeah.
And there were a couple of story ideas that at first I thought were really good. And I thought, oh, this would make a great novel. But as I, spent kind of weeks digging into them and really exploring the characters, but also the story, I found that some of them were just a little flat and were not as interesting. But eventually I landed on not just one story, but a couple of stories that had good meat to them.
Yeah, good structure and everything.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I really love that. And Lloyd, what do you think? You're talking about 4, but would you be open to extending it? If you were to find the audience loves it?
I don't know that I would.
don't know,
I think
okay.
in this case, I really outlined it as it was always going to be 4 books. From the moment I started, I knew the kind of 4 stories I wanted to tell in this world.
That means I have a good ending.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I tell all the parts of the story that I wanted to tell.
Okay.
And I think as I worked on like the first book and outlining that one, I got ideas for the other books in the series, and I kind of started to outline them all together as each book is still a standalone story, but they all kind of fit together like a puzzle piece.
Beautiful.
But I think there's a lot of stories I see where they kind of just keep going on and on.
Yeah.
And I like stories that are a bit more concise, that have a really good kind of arc to them and
I agree.
have an ending. I think that's a nice thing to be able to end the story when you want to end it. And that's not to say I won't keep writing.
Writing other series.
But I
potentially,
think these characters and this world and this story are going to end with the 4th book. And that's going to kind of wrap it all up in a nice bow.
I like that. It's not going to be like Game of Thrones, right?
No, yeah, still waiting on that last book there.
Oh, yeah. Another question I have, how have you received feedback? Has it been good? Because feedback is tough, right?
Yeah.
Feedback can be very tough at times, yeah.
And especially, with books, getting reviews is one of the big ways that the books sell.
Yes.
And I have to do a lot of work, not just to get reviews once the book is out, but to also get reviews before the book comes out. And so I have to reach out to, book bloggers, and I use the website Goodreads because that's where a lot of people leave their book reviews. But I'll do giveaways of the books before they come out. I use websites like NetGalley, which is specifically for getting advance reviews of books before they come out. And so I'll put a version of the book up on that site, and then book reviewers can request it before the book comes out, and they can read it and leave their honest feedback, which is tough because, sometimes people really enjoy the book, sometimes they don't. Very fortunately, for the first 2 books that I've done, it's been mostly positive feedback, which is nice. Every once in a while, I'll get a review. I remember one for, I think it was the first book that I did, and the review was basically like, it was a fine book, but I don't really like science fiction. And there was part of me that was like, well, it does say it's a science fiction book. I mean, if you don't like science fiction, I don't know what you expected you were going to get with this.
Yeah, no, for
And
sure.
I remember one for my second book, and it was just a single 1-star rating on the book. And I never interact with the reviewers because I think they're entitled to their opinions on the books. And but I do sometimes go to look and see how they've rated other books. And I remember that I clicked on the profile of the person who had left the 1-star review, and every single book on their profile was rated as 1 star. And it kind of made me think, do you actually like books? It made me feel a little better about that 1-star review because clearly it was not just my book. It was, I think, more of their overall view of books.
And as you get more popularity, you have to grow kind of a thick skin. Because the more masses it reaches, the more feedback, the more,
And you have to kind of let some of that feedback just roll off you. I actually, looking through a lot of the reviews I've gotten on my books, I think people, even when they have criticisms, have been really nice about a lot of it. I think it's been very constructive feedback, which I think I'm very fortunate for, because not every author gets the same grace.
Absolutely. That means you did a good job.
I hope, yeah.
All right, well, we'll take a quick pause and we'll be right back.
Today's episode is sponsored by RenovateMagicHub.com, your guide to transforming your home. Whether you're updating a room or planning a full makeover, Renovate Magic Hub provides tailored product suggestions to suit your style and budget. Visit RenovateMagicHub.com for inspiring and practical tips to create a space you'll love.
All right, guys, we're back from this short sponsorship. So, Lloyd, I want to break down the 2 books.
Yeah.
Because you took so much time to write them. So your first book is called
Wardenclyffe. So the first book was the one I wrote during the pandemic, and it was so much fun to work on because I've had the story kind of bouncing around in my head for a little while. And it takes place on Earth hundreds of years from now, after the Earth has gone through kind of this post-apocalyptic event. And this is, I would say, very not like the post-apocalyptic dystopian world. It's like, this is kind of way after that. This is, the Earth has kind of rebuilt a little bit, and there's small villages, and society is kind of still around, but smaller than it used to be.
Right.
And so it follows the story of this android named Bit. And so her town that she lives in, they lose power, and she basically sets off on a journey to try to find a way to restore power back to their town. And so it's her kind of traveling across hundreds of miles and meeting different people along the way, learning more about humans. And it's kind of a story of, one of my favorite tropes in science fiction of the, android or robot character learning to become more human.
Love that.
Yeah, and I think it's a fun way to explore it because it's told from a first-person perspective. So you see the story through her point of view. And it was a lot of fun to kind of write it that way and see the world kind of through her eyes.
That's awesome. So she's an android. She's not human.
Not human, no.
Oh, that's a very interesting perspective. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was, a lot of fun to kind of put the book together. And as I was writing it, I had all these ideas for the other books in the series and ways that they would fit together. So that's where the second book, Mercury, came into play.
Mercury. So I was mentioning earlier, Mercury is anything to do with astrology?
A little bit.
Really?
It's, in the sense that it is based on Greek god Mercury.
Okay, cool.
And so the Mercury is the name of the ship that they're on in the story. So it's about this girl named Lucy, and she's kind of the rebellious daughter of the captain of this colony ship. And through the story, she actually ends up getting sent back in time. And basically it's her story of kind of trying to get back to her own time while trying to save the ship from being destroyed by
wow.
distortions in space.
So this happens outside of the Earth.
It does, yeah.
wow.
So
Okay, cool.
the idea is that, before the cataclysm happened on Earth, they sent off these giant ships with a bunch of people to
Kind of like they always say, send to another planet.
yeah,
hoping to- yeah.
essentially, trying to make sure that the human race survives and it can either find another planet or at least live on the ship. So it's this giant colony ship. It was a lot of fun to do the world building around it because the style of the ship brings a lot of elements from the Earth with it, and kind of looking at if we were going to send a ship off and possibly the Earth was not going to make it, what types of things would we want to have on the ship and remember from the Earth.
Yeah, no, for sure. Did you get inspired from other books and other, of course, I can
100%,
imagine.
yeah. And
Yeah.
especially across both of these books, there's a lot of inspiration from, other science fiction and I'd say a lot of different areas. I think Fritz Lang's Metropolis, the German film, and there's an anime version of it too. But those were definitely a big inspiration for the first book. The idea of kind of an android. Lieutenant Data from Star Trek was definitely some of the inspiration for the character. And I think the idea of like this world in the story, the apocalyptic event is that the Earth essentially floods. And there's so much great science fiction that deals with that kind of like climate change science fiction, or Sci-Fi as they call it. So there's a lot of really good things that I read before this came to be. So there's a great series called Future Boy Conan. If you know Miyazaki, who does the Studio Ghibli movies, it was an animated TV series that was done by Studio Ghibli back in like the 80s. But it's essentially, the premise of the story is it follows this young boy named Conan who lives alone on an island after the Earth has been destroyed by a giant flood. And it's a really fun story. It's also really interesting if you like any of the Studio Ghibli films, because you could see where they were establishing a lot of the character archetypes that they use in a bunch of the other movies. So if you've ever seen the movie like Castle in the Sky, a lot of the characters in that TV show were kind of the precursors to the characters that ended up in that movie.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So I have a whole shelf of movies and TV
us.
shows, and other books that helped inspire the series.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, because I think when you're writing, it's important to be reading books in the genre that you're writing.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And so, the fourth book that I was working on is kind of one of my favorite tropes in science fiction, where it's about a giant ancient relic in space that they come across. But there have been so many stories that do that really well. You see it in Star Trek all the time. There's this great series called Ringworld that's about, they discover a giant ring in space that is a ring around a sun, and the inside of it has civilization. And then, Rendezvous with Rama is like a very classic sci-fi book where they, again, discover this kind of like ancient remnants of an old alien civilization, and they have to kind of explore and discover what it's all about.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Would you be open to making this into movies? If a filmmaker were to come to you and say, hey, Lloyd, I would love to make it into a movie, is that something you'd be open to?
Yeah, I mean, if the right offer came along, for sure.
Yes, that's awesome.
I think it's, there's so many things that I think would be so fun to see it become. People ask about, are you going to do an audiobook version, or are you going to translate it into other languages? And a lot of it is, again, because I am self-publishing the books.
Yeah, you're doing everything yourself.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that too is like, I have to eat a lot of the costs of producing these things myself. And, getting a book translated into another language starts around like 10 grand, and that's it's a very it's a big ask if I don't know that I'll get a return on that.
Do you think AI can come into hand and help you with some of those things, like translation, maybe audiobook?
I think there are parts of AI that might be able to, AI translation over the years has gotten a lot better, but I think a lot of writers still prefer working with when you're looking for a translator for your work, you're not
Yes.
just looking for someone who does translation, you're looking for someone that is themselves a writer. Because I don't just want the words translated. I need the meaning conveyed into
Okay.
another language, localizing it, making sure that the intent of what is written makes sense in those other languages. And I think, it's the same thing with audiobooks where like there are like AI generated voices and stuff like that are really good. But also, with these books, they're such a like personal thing to me.
Yeah.
And I really feel that I would want them acted by actual people. And I think a lot of that comes back to, I myself am a creative and an artist.
Yeah, of
And I
course.
want to make sure that I'm supporting other artists. And,
Yeah.
if there's an opportunity to hire voice actors to help with this, I would rather do that than, try to do it cheaper.
No, it makes sense.
yeah.
Or cutting corners and yeah.
Yeah, and so I think like while there are AI tools that have gotten pretty good, I'll admit, I think personally I would rather have it done by an actual person or not at all.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Love that.
And it's kind of the same thing with, the covers of the book and the inside of them.
Yeah, how do you get inspired? The purple, I see. Is it your favorite color?
Well, so the purple, so I actually hire an artist to do the covers for
okay.
these. So I don't do them
Oh,
myself.
perfect. Okay.
I use the same artist for both covers, and she
They
did
look very similar.
an
yeah.
incredible job with both of
Style.
them. But honestly, in the first book, when she did cover designs, she sent a couple of color options, and I saw the purple one, and I just really fell in
Really
love
loved it.
with the colors for it. And then the second one, I kind of had a sense that I wanted it to be blues. And then the third book, we're still working on the cover for that right now, but it's kind of shades of green. And it was actually one of the original mock-up colors that she had sent for the first book.
Oh, okay.
But because I knew all 4 books in the series
Yes.
before the first one
Right.
was coming together, I knew at that point that I wanted the green for the third book, not the first one.
Oh, I
So-
love that.
And it's fun, even in the covers, this one came out a couple of years
That's so
ago.
beautiful. Is somebody drew it? Hand drew it?
Yeah,
Or
she-
did it on
They're
graphic
all
design?
painted.
Oh, they're all painted.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there are little details throughout the
Yeah.
border design of the
They're
book,
very different, yeah.
but they reference other books in the series. So these flowers that you see are a flower called the Edelweiss.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'll just show it.
And they're also in the second book cover as well.
Okay. I'll show it in the camera.
But Edelweiss is the name of the third book. And so that's one of the central things.
So fun, like playing with us.
Well, and it's
design.
I think it's one of the fun parts of knowing what the full series is going to be before it's all out there is I can put those little Easter eggs, not just into the covers, but into the books themselves of how these books connect to each other. And in the first book, the main character Bit, she finds these old recordings that were from, hundreds of years before. And the recordings are essentially the plot of the third book. So, even though I had recordings that you see in the first book, they're taking place in the story of the third book. And so I had to kind of know what the plot of the third book was to put those recordings into the
That
first
makes
one.
sense, yeah, to intertwine them a little bit.
And make sure that, in the third book, they don't just feel out of place. They actually make sense in the story. So when I was starting to outline the third book, I had all the recordings. I'm like, I've already published the first book. These ones are set in stone that they have to say these
Yeah.
words in exactly this way.
Wow, I love that. And like it sounds all very structured. And lucky you for knowing from the very beginning, hey, this is 4 series and a little bit of each what you wanted it to be.
Yeah, I definitely had very detailed outlines of each book before I wrote it. And so, the fourth book, when I was finishing the first one, I had that full outline already. And, I hadn't written any of the text yet, but I knew the major plot beats. I knew what was going to happen in the story. And so I can put little pieces of that into the other books because I know where it's all eventually going.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm excited for the third book. When are you going to release it?
Yeah, so the third book, we're still waiting on some of the final artwork for that right now, but the goal is that over the summer it's going to be available for book bloggers and anyone who wants to kind of read and review an advanced copy of it. It'll be up on NetGalley, it'll be up on other book review sites. There are also, people who've reviewed the first and second books. I'll reach out to them again and
Yeah.
see if they want to read the next one, because it's always nice to have people, they also have read the other books, so I think they get
Yeah.
how it all fits together. Probably start marketing it over the summer, start getting those advanced reviews, and then the plan is for an early 2026 release. So that's when the book will officially come out into the world.
That's awesome. I'm excited for you. That's so
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot
Alrighty.
of fun. And in addition to the cover, I just to call it out because
Yeah.
I want to shout out the incredible artists that work on these.
Yeah.
But each book has these beautiful black and white illustrations inside.
Oh, wow, you have them in there. And that also
Yeah.
gives them a sense of like imagination because this is tough thing to fiction, right, in your head. So that's awesome that you added that.
And when I was looking at the design of the books, because I'm self-publishing,
Yeah.
I get to control every aspect of
aspect
that.
of it.
And I had a very clear vision of what I wanted the books to look like, what I wanted them to feel like. And if you go into Barnes & Noble or any bookstore right now, if you look at the young adult science fiction section, there are a lot of very similar looking book covers because in the traditional publishing industry, there's a lot of kind of pre-established things that work. They
Like formats.
yeah, they have styles of book cover that
Yeah.
work to market that genre of book. I wanted the books to have a slightly different feel than that, and I wanted them to feel more like vintage style. And so even the like the black and white illustrations inside, I always used to love the Chronicles of Narnia books.
I
And the,
love that movie.
yeah, but the editions that I had of those have these like beautiful black and white etchings inside, and I really love that look to the books.
Yeah.
And like even kind of painted cover designs feel a little old fashioned compared to, I guess, what's marketable right now. But again, it comes back to at the end of the day, I wanted to publish the books the way I wanted to publish
Yeah,
them.
no,
And
and that's the beauty of it. And you can
Yeah.
definitely tell like it has that personal touch to it because you are publishing, you're doing everything.
yeah,
So,
I think no matter what, you can always find an audience for the books that you want.
Oh, yeah.
You can always find people that are interested in that very niche area you're writing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of my stories are very like soft science fiction. It's definitely not a lot about the math and the science, and there's a lot of kind of hand waving of way of the science where
Yeah.
I kind of just say it works because I says it does.
you have rougher feedback if you had too much like,
Yeah.
specific technical stuff, I know.
The stories themselves are very cozy, which I like, and I definitely know there are other people who enjoy that. And I know that, especially for science fiction, it's not for everyone. It's not about trying to make these books appeal to every single person. It's about finding the people who want to read this type of story.
Yeah.
And I think, because I'm doing all the marketing myself, I can really make sure that I'm kind of honing in on the people who I think are going to enjoy this type of story the best.
Probably word of mouth is your best friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, having friends push it to their friends and like, hey, have you checked out this book and things like that. So,
Yeah, and even just going around to bookstores in person and, showing them copies and saying, here's my book. Do you want to carry it in your store? And luckily, even though it is self-published, it's still set up through the same systems that a lot of traditionally published books are. So bookstores can order copies through the system that they've already got set up in the
Yes.
store. So they don't have to do anything super like custom or
Yeah.
outside the box. I don't have to like hand deliver copies of the
Yeah,
book to
that's
them.
the beauty of today. Like,
Yeah.
that-
Well, and it's great too because it's worldwide. So if someone in like the UK wants a copy of my book, there's a printer in the UK that prints it
can
and
do it.
ships it there.
Oh, wow.
So it's not like shipping around the world. It's, just
so
kind
the
of.
quality is pretty good.
And it's, it definitely varies a little bit. I have the
Yeah.
hardcover ones that I sell on my website and
There's
then
a
the
soft-
paperback that I sell everywhere. Because the quality of the paperback is really consistent. The hardcovers, sometimes they don't fold the cover, the dust jacket around it
Yeah.
quite right. And so I prefer for the hardcovers to at least have my own eyes on it and make sure that they are like up to my standard.
That's awesome.
But yeah.
Yeah. So, Lloyd, I have a fun thing in my podcast where I ask you the question from the last guest,
Yeah.
and then you leave one for the next one.
Yeah.
So, the last guest question was, what forms part of your identity, something that's outside of work?
I think having fun. And I think it drives just so much of what I am drawn to and what I do is kind of always ask myself, Am I having fun with this? Whether it's about work, whether it's about, my hobbies and my passions. And I think it's important, especially, doing creative stuff,
Yeah.
not to get to a point where the creative things you're doing are stressing you more than you're
Yeah.
having fun with them. And, I've had a lot of jobs started in the fashion world, and it got to a point where I kind of
Lost
told
the
myself,
fun.
yeah, it was becoming more work than it was fun. Same with costume design. I had a lot of fun with that for a number of years. It was very enjoyable, but it did get to a point where I just wasn't having as much fun doing it.
Yeah.
I decided that it was time to shift in a new direction and find something else that I could have fun with and be really passionate about.
I love that.
Yeah, I think it's also try not to get too bogged down by feeling like, this is the only path I can take in my life. I'm fully willing to, switch gears at any point and say, you know what? I'm going to shift into a new creative field now. I'm going to move from video game design to fashion, or from fashion to costuming, or from costuming to writing.
You're very open-minded. Do you think that's something you learned throughout the years, or were you born this way?
I think a lot of it is, growing up, especially like some of the schools I went to, were always very nurturing of creative fields.
love
And
that. Okay.
I never felt like going into those creative areas was less valid than going into something like business or accounting or something.
So you have freedom, so to speak.
Yeah, and I had the freedom to take as many art classes as I wanted and explore different mediums. I remember, from kindergarten through 8th grade, we experimented in pretty much every style of art I can imagine.
wow.
I remember doing painting and making stuff with clay, but I also remember doing like stone carving, a full wolf's head out of a block of stone. I was probably in like 7th or 8th grade at the time.
fun.
Yeah, but again, it was, they really let us explore so many different creative fields. And I think I kind of came out of with the mentality of not just like that I can do each one of these, but also that each one of these could be a really valid career path and like actual thing you do. And I will admit, like some of them, like working in musical theater,
Yeah.
I loved it. It was a lot of fun. It might not have paid well. That's also a tough balance to find when working in a creative field, is like I like having fun with it, but one of the things that can suck the fun right out of it is having to make your living doing it. And when your rent payment is tied to those creative passions, it becomes a lot of work and it becomes less fun than I think it could be. And that's why I like kind of doing the writing stuff right now, because I have a day job that pays the bills, but the writing I can really do without having to depend on it to make my living. And I think having the separation between your creative passions and a job that pays the bills, not to say that, I don't enjoy my job, because I do, but it's a very different type of creativity than what I'm doing outside of work.
I love that. So it's good to know, like, you want something that pays the bills, but then also you can have something fun and passionate about on the side. And that's probably better than putting everything on that passion and struggling and
Because I had times where I was working in a costume shop, and so I would be sewing for 8 to 10 hours a day, and I would come home, and at the time my creative passion was making costumes and doing that kind of stuff, and I would come home after doing it for 10 hours a day and just be burnt out. Like I wouldn't want to do it as my kind of creative outlet anymore. Now I've kind of found a better balance where even before I started doing writing, having a day job that pays the bills and then having the theater stuff outside of it was a really nice way to make sure that I could still just have fun doing the theater and not have to stress about whether I'll make enough to make rent doing it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I love that. So what would be your question for the next guest?
It's inspired by my own kind of life path, because in my life I've had a lot of opportunities, I think, where my life could have gone a different direction. And so I think my question for the next person is, are there any major points in your life where you could have seen yourself going down a different career path? And what do you think that would have been like to pursue that different career than the one you're in now?
Oh, that's a good one. Oh, man. Hopefully they don't have too much attachment to feelings.
Yeah.
Some people get emotional, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting thing to think about, especially as someone who has jumped around from career to career and jumped between so many different fields, I do often wonder, like, what would it have been like if I had stayed with fashion and continued to do fashion design as my full thing? Or what if I had stayed in musical theater? Could I have kept working my way up and, eventually design a Broadway show? What would it have been like if I had stayed a hat maker or even looking further back and stayed in video game design? Like, there's so many different branches that my life could have taken. And
You don't get sad?
No,
Oh, interesting. Because most people do. I think because it's also attached to a lot of the regret.
yeah.
So it's interesting that you see it as like, maybe because you're in the
Yeah.
storytelling, and to you it's like interesting to just dive into that.
I look at where I am right now and I'm like, I've got a really nice life. I'm happy. I enjoy what I'm doing. And the way I see it is, even though I've taken different paths from those other options, the door's not ever closed. And I think
Yes.
that's a thing that a lot of people feel, is that they've made a choice to pursue one thing, or their life has gone in one direction. But that doesn't mean that you can't still go back and do other things that you might have been passionate about.
Sure. If the opportunity presents itself, why not?
Yeah, and not just, with your career path, but even little things. It's like, I bought a ukulele maybe like 15, 16 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And I never learned how to play it. And then all of a sudden
But you left it there.
it moved with me through, I brought it to college, I brought it everywhere I went, never learned to play it. And then suddenly during the pandemic, I was finally like, you know what? I've had this for years. I'm finally going to go back and learn how to play it. And I think keeping those options open is something that I always really like to do. And, for me, like, yeah, even though it took me 15 years to finally pick it up and learn how to play, I always kind of kept it in the back of my mind as an option. And, it was the reason I never threw it away. I think it was more about opportunity at some point, if I ever wanted to pick it up and learn it, that it was there. I think it's the same with, creative passions. I see it with a lot of creative people. They tend to hoard art supplies because they're like, well, but what if I ever want to get back into watercolor? Or what if I ever want to go back and pursue these other creative passions? I'm definitely one of those types of people where I...
You can throw anything from Lloyd's house.
Yeah,
You're like, no, that has a purpose.
I mean, even like my books, I have so many like
By the way,
reference
beautiful
books.
collection, yeah.
Thank you.
Oh,
It's, I mean,
yeah.
it's hard not to keep buying more and more books.
No, for sure.
Yeah. But a lot of them are, reference books. I have books on calligraphy. I have books on set design and production design. All my fashion books from when I was in fashion school. And it's, it's always nice to have those kind of still in my world in case I ever want to go back and say, I am curious about fashion today and I want to go back and do some illustrations. I don't know. I like also trying to get other people to
Like
do creative
promoting
stuff.
it,
Yeah.
like promoting it.
Because I enjoy doing creative stuff, but, I run like a little writers group. I like writing a lot, but I also like trying to help other people really get into it and really explore their own creative passions.
awesome.
And I think there, so many people kind of are always waiting for that little push to get them going creatively. And I always
think
like to be
so.
that push for them when I
Push.
can.
That one person that believes in them. Like, we all need that one person, that's like, let's go.
Exactly.
It doesn't take a village. It just takes one person that really, truly believes in you and you're ready to go.
I mean, I've seen people that they're just so close to doing it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, you have the ideas, you have the
Equipment,
the-
potentially.
Yeah, you have all the stuff you need to do it. You just need that extra little push to get you going, to get the
next
ball rolling.
That's awesome. Well, Louis, where can people find you?
Yeah, so they can find me on Instagram, Lloyd.Hall on Instagram.
I'll link it in the video.
Thank you.
Yes.
And then I have a website for my books, so you can find those on Instagram. There's Wardenclyffe Series is the name of the Instagram. And then you can also find it on wardenclyffeseries.com. So yeah, keep an eye out. We've got a new book coming for promotion this summer, and then going to be coming out in early 2026.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
saw that your book is also available on Amazon as well. There's a lot
Yeah.
of distributors on the website. I saw that.
Yeah,
which is
so
great.
pretty much if you're looking for a physical copy of the books, you can find them pretty much in any bookstore.
That
If
is
they,
wonderful.
as long as they use kind of the regular book distribution channels, they can order a copy if they don't have it in the store. And if you're looking for the ebooks, yeah, they're on Amazon, they're on Apple Books, they're yeah, pretty much anywhere books can be found.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, but if you're looking for the hardcovers, those are just on my website because I sign every
Only
copy.
for the best. Oh, so you signed them as well?
I do,
Oh,
yeah.
that's awesome.
I sign every book. If anyone's in the UK, there's a bookstore over there that I've done signed book plates for, so they can order copies of the book, and then I've signed all the things,
plates, and
and
they
they
can
just put
stuff
them
it.
in.
Okay.
There's definitely a lot of ways to get signed books.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure having you.
Yeah, it's been a
Appreciate
pleasure being
you.
on.
So yeah, go ahead, guys, and get your copy. I'm super interested to see, what the third book brings, and
Yeah, I'm excited for it to finally come to fruition.
Yay! All right, guys, this is all for Siris Says. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, hit him up on Instagram. I'm
Yeah,
sure he can,
please do.
Reach out to him, and then thank you. Alrighty, guys, bye.
Thanks for listening to Siris Says. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and drop a like. Share your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for more inspiring stories. Until next time, keep chasing those dreams.